and Marcia. Hello and welcome to New Hampshire Peace Actions, Peace and Justice Conversation Series. It is Monday, September 14th, 1 week before the International Day of Peace. And we have asked our board co-chair, Krisan Evenson, who is a political psychologist who has worked in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, to give us a presentation on how the International Day of Peace came to be. This conversation series can be seen every other Monday. So the next one, we're going to skip the next one. The next one that will happen will be October 12th, because we'll have our fall fundraiser in a couple weeks. So that's on October 2nd. Please don't forget to join us for that. Check out our website, www.nhpeaceaction.org, for more information on that. I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Krisan now, I think. Krisan, thank you so much for putting together this presentation and giving us some time tonight so that we can hear this story.
Thanks very much, Will. It's a pleasure to be with all of you, especially in a great September. I should also mention that we are a couple of days into Concord's Multiculturalism Festival is having a whole week devoted, they're calling it International Week here in New Hampshire. So I just wanted to give a brief little shout out to them because they have graciously included us on their calendar this year. So I wanted to just have a conversation around this holiday for a few reasons. Number one, it's such a great story as to how it came into being. Part of the story of how this holiday came to be established on the UN calendar was affected by one individual. And that's the amazing part of this. The person, of course, I referenced in the advertising that we did for this event, Jeremy Gilley. He's an age peer of mine. He's British. And there are some spooky parallels in how I have sort of evolved in my thinking in international peace and what matters to me and how we make it. So part of the story is reflective, really, about some of my own evolution too. So I'm hoping to do a few things during this evening. The first thing that I want to do is just sort of give you a quick little overview of, let me just share my screen here. Just to give you a little bit of an outline of what I'd like to talk with you about tonight. This is the bit of an outline for my comments. And first of all, we'll talk a little bit about the holiday and its formation, of course. Both of the pictures that you can see on this slide, which I hope is showing, is Jeremy Gilley. And the top picture is him in negotiation mode because he met with several heads of state. The bottom picture.
We're not seeing the slides.
Oh, you're not? Oh, gosh. Oh, no wonder, because there we go.
Thank you.
You see it now? Sure, yeah. So I'm so sorry. I normally work with two screens, so it looks just about normal to me. So the top picture here of Jeremy Gilley is him in negotiation mode. He worked negotiating with several heads of state all through the world during this fabulous story. The bottom picture is also Jeremy Gilley in real life. So it's much more close to his personal style. His story about making this holiday has culminated in an organization he founded called Peace One Day. They are live streaming their own events 7 days from today. And so you can Google that up too. So as I mentioned, there are several parallel themes in Jeremy's and my sort of peacemaking life. Excuse me. So there's been an International Day of Peace at the UN all the way back to 1981 when it was first established. So it was a floating holiday, though. It was always held the third Tuesday in September, which happened to coincide with the opening day of that year's UN session. So it was a holiday sort of like Thanksgiving. And, it wasn't always on the same day. It was fused with the rest of the UN activities. And in fact, I went back and looked at their resolution, and it was agenda item number 33. So not exactly showcasing the idea of peace. The theory, though, was to commemorate and strengthen the ideals of peace. So their heart was in the right place, of course. However, this holiday sort of floated around, and it wasn't of a primary attention. Jeremy Gilley has an amazing entry about 10 or 15 years after this 81. And why is this significant? For him, the way he tells it, he was sort of a class clown. He wasn't very focused in school. He was extremely concerned with what the world looked like and how things were not going well. So he had a real concern. And the story of why he took on this quest has a lot of parallels with my view of international conflict and peace, and the evolution over a 35-year period of how I have taught about this in university classrooms. So, so there's a kind of parallel track, strangely, where Jeremy Gilley and I have sort of been operating from. So the part of Jeremy's beginning that's significant is a lot like my students who begin college as freshmen or first-year students. They come to you prepackaged with this great idealism. And the first thing you do to them is explain everything that's wrong in the world. And if you've had experience with college curriculum, you open the catalog and it is Introduction to World Problems, Global Problems, Issues in International Relations, about every way that things could go wrong. This is their beginning to learning about the international world. And so Jeremy had a very similar entry. Why, in his case, why was there so much pestilence and violence and starvation, etc.? And so both of us, it turned out, were really frustrated with having to turn the idealism that we began with into really kind of, depression. So a lot of these themes were such downers, and it's very easy to become discouraged, especially if there's no countervailing force, and even more so that there's no beginning point for peace. So, so Gilley feels that his responsibility is going to be to do something about this. And he wasn't such a great student, he says, and he became an actor after his education. And so he becomes kind of interested in filmmaking as a way to make sense in the world. And so for him, he wanted to see if he could create a starting point for peace. And so his starting point becomes a single question. He begins to talk to elders He has this significant story with his grandfather, who, this is just kind of a fascinating side note, was a POW in Japan, saw the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that we've talked about recently. He developed blood poisoning in Nagasaki. 700 men that he went with, only 23 of them came back. 2 of them died on the journey home, and so there's 21 of them left. And he passed away when Jeremy was 11. And I just find this fascinating, but I'll come back to that at the further into the end. So here's the question that Gilley asked in the beginning. Why is there no day of peace that we can point to as a starting point? Why is it always a response to war? And why is there no moment when everybody participates in making peace? And the more people he talked to, the more he found that that everyone he talked to wanted peace, and yet it still wasn't happening. So there had to be something that provided this starting kit, this window of opportunity. So here's this little 5-minute trailer to the film that I just want to show you. I hope.
My name's Jeremy Gilley. I'm an independent documentary filmmaker and the founder of Peace One Day. In July 1998, I decided to make a film about peace. Then I realized there was no day of peace. That was it. I was going to try and establish the first ever annual Peace Day, a day of global ceasefire and non-violence, a day for everyone to become involved in the peace process. The office was a spare room in my mum's house. I had a computer, a telephone, and a handful of committed friends to help out. Over the next 3 years, I travelled the world to build the case, working with the United Nations, governments, Nobel Peace Laureates, humanitarian organisations, and those living in conflict zones.
If there is a cessation for a day, then it gives us an opportunity to move supplies safely through places that are otherwise difficult.
Through time, I think it will become more and more effective. What do you think?
To come to 100%,
if you can hear me, we're not seeing it.
Need a lot of time. But I think the great thing is at least we've done something for the next generation.
So we're not getting the videos, so not sure why.
Yeah,
It says
me either,
we're viewing your screen and we're hearing it, but
I don't know why. Okay, let's try this. Okay. Do you want to?
Krisan, you might want to leave screen share and then come back.
Oh, come back in.
restart. That's what I do too.
Oh, okay. All right, so you do see the slide.
Sure do.
Okay, so it should launch. You seeing it now?
Nothing yet.
Okay.
Krisan,
My name's Jeremy Gilley.
Krisan, I think you need to launch it and then share it with us.
Yeah, maybe I'll, okay, let's do that. Let's try it this way. Better? Redo?
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay.
I'm an independent documentary filmmaker and the founder of Peace One Day. In July 1998, I decided to make a film about peace. Then I realized there was no day of peace. That was it. I was going to try and establish the first ever annual Peace Day, a day of global ceasefire and non-violence, a day for everyone to become involved in the peace process. The office was a spare room in my mum's house. I had a computer, a telephone, and a handful of committed friends to help out. Over the next 3 years, I travelled the world to build the case, working with the United Nations, governments, Nobel Peace Laureates, humanitarian organisations, and those living in conflict zones.
If there is a cessation for a day, then it gives us an opportunity to move supplies safely through places that are otherwise difficult.
Through time, I think it will become more and more effective. What do you think?
To come to 100%, you need a lot of time. But I think the great thing is at least we've done something for the next generation.
Any moment that we can give the combatants to pause, to think, and reflect on what they are doing to their own people and to the environment will be a great achievement, and I will support it 100%.
In September 2001, the member states of the United Nations unanimously adopted a Peace Day, a day of ceasefire and non-violence, the 21st of September, annually. It was incredible.
Was originally brought to our attention by a UK-based organisation, Peace One Day.
It is so decided.
The next challenge was to prove that the day could really work by stopping the fighting in a conflict zone so that humanitarian action could take place. An old friend, Jude Law, wanted to help. After a further 3 years of campaigning, that goal became a reality in Afghanistan, where in 2007, due to everybody's hard work, particularly the United Nations, Peace Day agreements were reached with all sides, including the Taliban. As a result, 10,000 health workers were able to vaccinate 1.4 million children against polio on Peace Day. The UN also announced in Afghanistan that on the day, there was a 70% reduction of violent incidents. It was amazing.
The cynic used to say, what difference does a day make? What I saw in Afghanistan was, well, the difference is life or death.
But whilst Peace Day is a day of ceasefire, it's also a day of non-violence, when individuals can come together to make peace. In fact, 97% of the world's violence happens in our communities, our schools, our homes, places of work. Consequently, we reach out to all sectors of society to ask everyone to become involved. Providing free educational tools, building coalitions of corporations, NGOs and others, creating sport, music and dance initiatives, holding Peace Day celebrations featuring major artists. These are some of the many ways we spread the message.
On September 21st, we will be celebrating peace on that one day.
I'm delighted that Unilever is a founding member of the Peace One Day Corporate Coalition.
Who will you make peace with on the 21st of September?
It's all working. In 2015, we're confident that we exceeded the target of 1.5 billion people exposed to Peace Day. The 21st of September is the day when there's the greatest reduction of violence. Peace Day is bringing the world together, and that's peace building.
The International Day of Peace is a time for reflection, a day when we reiterate our belief in non-violence and call for a global ceasefire. I call on all of us to think how we can contribute to building a culture of peace in our homes, schools, and communities.
So who will you make peace with on Peace Day, the 21st of September this year? Please follow us on Twitter, join us on Facebook, and get involved. By working together, there will be peace one day.
Okay. So it's so dramatic, a story, right? There are a few versions of this story out there, and I'll share with Will at the end of the hour a couple of other links that you can watch for free. Jeremy Gilley, a few years into this process, made first the film, but he has a TED Talk as well, and the TED Talk is something like 17 minutes. It's a feature-length documentary. And so I think that one is about an hour and 20 minutes if you want the full version. So of course, there's plenty of details that don't make it into the 5-minute, trailer cut. And so let me just share some of them with you, because I find them compelling. And it's such an eerie, spooky set of parallels with my own teaching and international relations career. So he started this process in 98. He gets this idea. 99, there's the big launch. 114 people, mostly his friends and mom, 0 press. So he's living, in his mother's basement, literally, and surviving on donations of people who also think this is a great idea. And so eventually he travels the world, as I mentioned. The Dalai Lama is in the trailer. He's the first person to respond ever, to Gilley's plausible, offer. So everyone he talks to, all of these leaders say, well, this is an idea whose time has come. And they don't seem to get beyond that point. So in other words, when push comes to shove and you have to, deliver on your word, there was always a reason. He was really had to become a shuttle diplomat, and say, well, this other leader says that they can act, will you also? And this process takes 3 years. And so finally, basically, he realizes he's got to talk to more than just the leaders. And so there's plenty of children featured in this trailer. And so he talks to a lot of young people. And that's where the action was for him. And that's where the action always was for me too. I'm a specialist on children and conflict and children and peace. And so the parallels are astounding, that children understand better than the adults do. And the people who are on the front lines, who experience what it means to be at peace and not, realize that this is kind of a no-brainer. So there are plenty of political reasons to say no, but there are lots of basic, very fundamental reasons to say yes. So the clearest answers he gets to this idea are from young people. So while he was going to just make a film and see whether it worked or not, this turns Gilley's filmmaking into a life mission. He's going to keep filming and keep making headway until it succeeds. So he's galvanized by this. And finally, as you see in the film, it's at the end, although he talks to many, many countries across the world, it is Costa Rica and the UK who decide to co-sponsor this resolution in the UN. And the UK might have been a little peer pressure because he is British, so I kind of, understand why they would. But 54 other world leaders decide that although they didn't want to take that first step to present this to the UN, to have a standalone holiday, they're willing to sign on to this and be part of the ride along. So 56 countries sign on. And as a fixed holiday, which is important, that important distinction, it passes unanimously. And at the time, this is September 8th, 2001, when it passes. That means at the time about 195 countries. That's phenomenal. And so now that we have a fixed holiday, that they don't have to share the attention with the start of the UN sessions, there's a day that's devoted to international peace specifically. So what can you do with that day? Kofi Annan decides, he's Secretary General at the time, he decides, well, the first thing we need is a press conference. And so they call the press conference for a few days later, 9 a.m. They gather on the UN Plaza. And what is a few days later but September 11th of 2001? So this is just kind of an incredible part of this story for me, because due to setting up the microphones and a bit of a delay and some technical glitches, which we can appreciate tonight, they never get this press conference off the ground, because of course they have to immediately evacuate the UN. And so it's such an anticlimactic ending to that week where the holiday comes into being. And so Gilley has to leave New York City without this press conference, and he leaves, and I'm quoting him now, freaked but empowered, because okay, he didn't get his press conference, but it wasn't about the media anyway, and so he leaves to go back to the UK. Now that he has a holiday, what is he going to do with it? So what can you do with a day of peace? Are you going to be a cynic? Are you going to say, oh, well, okay, it's symbolic, great idea, but we're still not going to do anything about it? And so he begins to talk again with these leaders. Okay, now I've delivered. There's an International Day of Peace. What can you do? And again, it's not world leaders who respond first. It is it's UNICEF and it's UNAMA, the UN mission to Afghanistan, which there is just a kind of side reference to that in the trailer. So he believes that it can't not work, but if you start small and there's something manageable that people can make theirs in a very pragmatic way, there's a lot more that can take place. And I discovered this also with my students, with making peace a very pragmatic, action-oriented project. And we can come back to that too. So in essence, he's getting two messages. One is coming from these cynical leaders that say, they're really not prepared to, stop war. The other more hopeful message that he's getting are from those on the ground, the citizens, youth, leaders, the leaders of NGOs. So what can you do with that International Day of Peace? You can get supplies in for humanitarian missions. You can, with a ceasefire, you can care for the people who are on the ground. You can engage in much more positive behavior. Yes, it might be temporary, but it's an opening. And remember, that's his goal, just a starting point. So the first International Day of Peace, where he gets people to tag on to something that is pragmatic and immediate, is in Afghanistan. And it's the Taliban that is, kind of surprisingly, one of the actors that says, okay, we're on, sign us up. And the other side, also the ISAF, the International Force, says, okay, 24 hours of peace, of cessation, a ceasefire. And what they do in those 24 hours is 10,000 health workers vaccinate 1 million kids against polio. It is the most amazing thing, I think. If you were going to have a great starter kit, what a beginning. And so from that moment forward, there are humanitarian aid programs, there are the provisions of aid or food emergency aids. There are lots of new communications that open, and it's amazing because the following year, at mid-June, ISAF publishes in their publication 100 Days to Peace, because they are counting down to what they're going to do on the next day, International Day of Peace. the next time they have a ceasefire. So it becomes this habit now that it is a fixed holiday. There's advanced planning you can do proactively, not just sort of thinking about peace or not simply wondering, can we do some sort of ceremony? There are things that are much more pragmatic. Now Gilley enters like phase 3, tempting leaders, goading them into joining these NGOs and so on who are willing to act. And it's kind of amazing. They do begin. So in pockets around the world, there are moments when this holiday becomes not just 24 hours, but maybe it's 48 hours. And that Afghanistan example becomes more than just one continent, more than just one country. So this is really galvanizing to Gilley. It was amazing for my students to change the way we were thinking about global conflict and look at global solutions, to turn everything on its head and say, what if? And try to have a response to those people who could be very cynical. And it's very easy to be cynical. But in 2008, while ISAF and Afghanistan were saying, here's what we're doing for peace, I remember this. I was just at PSU for a couple of years, and I said, I actually wrote to the student newspaper, are we doing enough for peace? So for Gilley, he's going to go for the global truth. He's trying to spread this around. His big lesson is that although he still has some trouble getting political actors, government leaders to act for a whole host of reasons that we're familiar with, his bigger success is this profusion of individual actions. It's not government all the time. It's citizens. It's people closer to the front lines. It's where it matters. It reminds me of that African proverb, when elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers, So the people who are closest to those actions are really the ones where it makes the greatest difference. So query, the quest, and what's the quandary? Are we doing enough for peace? Is it enough for the naysayers and the cynics that we have this International Day? There are amazing things that happen during this 24 hours. It expands in several countries beyond the 24 hours. So the UN has a whole page devoted to this now standalone holiday. And you can sign on to lots of globally streaming events, such as the organization that came out of Gilley's work called Peace One Day. For me, this has meant thinking about what to do in ways that get closer to the people it most affects. And for my students, that made all the difference, because politics, especially international relations, and especially here in the Granite State, got a lot closer to home. They learned about the population of their state, the fact that there is diversity here, and that a lot of our immigration has come from past conflicts, and what peace means to those people is everything for all of us people. So bringing this back to the Granite State, Peace Action has been able to foster several iterations now of the International Day of Peace. And I'm particularly pleased by this because we deal a lot with US foreign policy. That's the United States position on various issues occurring abroad. But we do a little bit less of international relations and global issues. But it's a point of connection that we do and can make. So I've been really pleased about that. So here are just a few examples from the few of our past years. We hosted in, I think it was 2013, we posted on or hosted on the State House lawn, the Art for Peace Festival, which some of you may remember. And it was great. It was art making. It was, there was a huge mural, and there were people that were just filtering through for whatever reason on that day. And it sparked a lot of conversation, which is of course always the first step. I love that it was a physical thing to do, and it was grounds for sort of a backdrop to the conversations that we all should be having all the time about what it means to have peace and make it. Over the past several years, we've hosted the Piece of Pizza for Peace program, and Rick Eames has been a sponsor of that, where several of our area pizza shops donate part of their proceeds to the various organizations. And then closer yet, I mentioned at the top of our hour the Concord Multicultural Festival that is just an explosion of culture in the very best way in the city of Concord. There's a whole week of lectures and films, and I saw it somewhere flashing in the chat there. I saw it, Becky Field's 2 books. There's every kind of activity that you could want. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we've expanded beyond the Concord Multicultural Festival. There are now similar festivals in Laconia and in Keene and in Nashua. And all of these have begun really to network, and we have it stretching from one end of the state to the other. The more that we do that, the more that we pay attention to this kind of idea as a standalone idea, the closer we get, I think, to talking about peace in a way that's honest and about what we want and how we would like it to come about, what it should look like, and finally separating it from, in my view, from its usual position as a counterpoint to war or violence. Because usually when we talk about peace, it's always in opposition to war, which places war and violence and conflict as our starting point. And that's bothered me since the 1980s. You know, it's very frustrating to begin to talk about peace by having to explain all the things that are not peace so that you can define peace, but that's backwards. The more that we know recently about cognitive science, we know that the human brain and its cognition begins with empathy. That's amazing that it's hardwired. It's not self-interested behavior. That's not our hardwired in the brain starting point. It's empathy. And so there's a lot that's coming online now that wasn't available in the research world when I was first getting my start. So I think that I have come to most of the points that I wanted to just sort of explore with you. But I would love to know, I know that we have a few minutes for questions or comments, and I'd love to get to those. And or if you have had experience with this idealism versus cynicism spectrum, and how you think you might be working with that or against it. So Will, I'll turn it back to you.
All right. do we have anything from the audience to kind of kick us off? Any thoughts? I see that there's some comments from Nancy. How about a counterpart to incarceration? Yeah, it's just the Nancy. Do you want to talk a little bit about that comment? And thank you for mentioning Becky's books.
Yeah.
Becky is someone that is a member and who we work with through a few different channels. She's been she always seems to show up on the days when I'm so distraught that I'm crying and offer me a hug. So Nancy, do you want to dive a little bit into the how about a counterpart to incarceration and what you're thinking there?
Well, I started the New Hampshire Immigrant Visitation Program about 6 years ago now, and still co-chair that along with Maggie Fogarty from the American Friends Service Committee. And I see when I go to the unit for people with convictions on their records, I see that they're all Black. And so I'm confronted immediately with the violence of just racism itself. And then secondarily with the violence of being incarcerated when you've come to our borders seeking asylum from some other atrocity. And I just think about these people who have particularly, they're looking for peace. That's what they're looking for is peace. And they've left their country because they can't find it there. And then we visit more violence on them. I really just wish we could figure out a better system than throwing people in jail.
I think we can figure out a better system pretty easily. The problem is electing leaders who are willing to implement a better system. I think in particular the Trump administration has been explicit that their intent is to punish asylum seekers and as a deterrent. So I don't think. I mean, and not to say that previous administrations have not been cruel to immigrants and asylum seekers as well, but it isn't. I do think that there's what you said, Krisan, about compassion being hardwired into us. Like we know how to treat each other with respect and dignity. It takes being taught to hate.
Yeah, I quite agree. I think the sticking point usually is that we definitely know that things should be different. And most of us have some idea of what should be different. We don't always know how to get there. And so I think the more that we do in talking to people who have been there, or even people, outside the U.S. even, who also have social structures that have included incarceration, because not all incarceration is the same. There are organizations, for example, who look outside the U.S. To Brazil, just as an example, and they're aware of other models of incarceration out there, and that there are pockets of groups and organizations who are trying those models here. So two quick examples that I just happen to know about. One of them is the Search for Common Ground organization in Washington. They, for years, have done, they use media. So they've done post-conflict societies soap operas. So they actually have dramatizations of the conflict, which is a lot easier for people to relate to sometimes than that in-your-face directly speaking about it. And it seems to have both a therapeutic angle for the people who are listening when you're in an intractable conflict situation, but also models to follow, that you can apply in your own So that's one example. The other example is I have a friend from Maine who is a documentary filmmaker. His name is Ben Levine, and he's a psychiatrist by training, actually. But he did a film that is seeing a revival, actually, the more that we talk about BLM and incarceration rates again. But essentially, he looked at prisons, and I believe it was getting gangs to cross the line toward each other and start talking with each other. It's a phenomenal film. Naturally, I cannot remember the name of the film, but it's easy to Google up Ben Levine. He's in Maine in Waterville. He may be associated with the University of Maine at Orono too, I'm not sure. But anyway, those are two examples.
In your research, so you had kind of the grand opening of International Peace Day, and the polio vaccinations being handed out. Has it continued internationally to have that kind of effect where there is a global ceasefire?
Yes, not only for vaccination campaigns. I just saw just within the last 2 weeks an announcement that finally in the world we have eradicated polio on a practical level. There are so few cases now. So yes, that specifically did go on. But there are also other opportunities where people have realized that this holiday is coming, and it's sort of become part of a part of the cultural landscape. And to me, that's most exciting because it's very subtle, but you find yourself saying, okay, International Day of Peace is coming. What am I going to do? You know, and for me, it was always never lose an opportunity for optimism although it was always the second or third week of school, right, of the semester, there was always something on my calendar to celebrate or to do something on that day. And we do this for other holidays too. And sure enough, now most big organizations are thinking about what they're going to do on the International Day of Peace. In fact, 7 days from today, on the International Day of Peace, we are including the We Are Many film that is choosing that day to launch their film. So there's a lot of various arts and cultural events that are choosing that moment in the calendar because they have a sort of messaging that they feel is really close to the intent of the International Day of Peace. So the short answer is yes, there's a ton. I on that slide set that I started with, there at the final slide of that set, I'll send it to you, or I can post it on Facebook if you like. It has a list of links on it. So one is the link to the UN's International Day of Peace page, in case you want to know more about this or look at themes. Usually they have a theme of the year. Climate is pretty predominant lately, no surprise. I also have a link to the Peace One Day organization so that you can see the breadth of topics that Peace One Day is engaged in. And then, and I also included those links to the beyond the trailer if you wanted to watch the TED Talk and the full length film. So.
Cool. You mentioned the We Are Many film. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Just briefly, I believe Doreen, it's in our weekly newsletter. Is that right? It's come out on the events now. So if you're getting our newsletter, there's a whole synopsis there. It has to do with, actually, I mean, I have only seen the trailer of that one too, which is kind of brief. But in essence, the voices for peace are getting louder and more numerous. So if you wanted a one-liner, tagline, That's the intent there. But I get the impression from the film that it begins, I want to say in Egypt, probably at the beginning of the Arab Spring, but that may be unfair. You know, I'm not sure if that's like a focal point. Doreen saying yes? Yeah.
Folks on the call, any questions for Krisan? She's a wellspring of information. You might discover her with her booth at some point doing Chris Answers. So does anyone have anything they wanted to ask or that's sprung forward in this during this conversation?
I was just wondering about that Ben Levine film. I was trying to Google up titles while you were talking, and I don't know that I found the right one. I have
Oh, really? Okay.
Self-Defense, Off the Cuff, Green Card, Sex Ed, Seymour and Gloria.
Oh, maybe the wrong Ben Levine. There's another film that he made on the French Canadians that are of the state of Maine, actually. And it's called Waking Up French. So if you did a search Ben Levine Waking Up French, you'll probably get the rest of his work.
Okay, maybe I get the wrong Ben Levine.
You might, yeah. He's probably definitely retired by now. I mean, I first met him. This Waking Up French film was from the 1980s. Essentially, speaking of conflict and peacemaking, he interviewed Francophones from New England about their experience as Catholics and French speakers during the 60s to find out their experience. And, you know, it's sort of a precursor to today. They had crosses burned on their lawn. It's an amazing, amazing story. And he went back a generation later because they said they were going to raise their kids in French. And basically he wanted to know, did they still do that? Because at the time, the northern half of Maine, was still French speaking. And that's how I got to know Ben, because I was a French major. I have bachelor's and master's degrees in French.
So there are links to Ben Levine in the chat as well as Waking Up French.
Okay.
And Tom posted an article from Valley Breeze about Waking Up French as well. Is there?
It's an awesome story about vehicles toward peace, because the Lewiston, Maine area was home or became home to, you're talking about refugees, to West African, but also, I believe, also Sudanese refugees, if I'm not mistaken, and their language was French. So it contributed to a resurgence of French language in central Maine, and they began the acculturation and assimilation of those refugees. It's a beautiful story about understanding and making your way in a new part of the world.
Neat. All right. Well, thank you so much, Krisan, for your presentation tonight, and all the work you do for peace and for New Hampshire Peace Action.
I'd love to see your plans, all of you, on our Facebook page. What are you doing for peace, and who will you make it with?
Yeah. And make sure that folks are ready to join us on October 2nd for our fall fundraiser. We're going to feature 4 stories of people who are making peace and have been making peace in their own ways. So thanks all, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.